Mr. Lennon's career in education has spanned over 30 years. He's worked as principal of schools in Bahrain and Abu Dhabi, then as headmaster of a large and successful international school in Sri Lanka. Since the early 90s, he has also been involved in educational consultancy and teacher training in the UK, Asia, and the Middle East. His background as a musician, as well as an English teacher, and his experience in the leadership of international schools gives him a unique insight into the issues faced by teachers of English as a second language, as well as those faced by students embarking on their careers in the rapidly changing environments of the 21st century.
A very good morning to you. I'm very, very pleased to see you, and I hope that I'm sure we will have a very productive and interesting day together. So, as you were informed, the topic of my little presentation this morning is why 21st century. This is key. Why 21st century students need English. In the modern age, young people need to learn English. This is my contention. Now, I think there are three key things. These things are linked and interrelated, but for simplicity, we'll look at them one by one today. They are globalization. They are what many people these days call academic inflation, and the knowledge-based economy. Let's look at them one by one. First of all, globalization. Now, this is where businesses establish a sort of global presence, but the key to globalization is that the operation is integrated across several different parts of the world, several different continents even. And by integrated, I mean that it is one business, it is one operation, and there may be 5,000 miles between two offices, but in effect, it could be just down the corridor. So, originally political power, but now cultural power, as Professor Crystal tells us. My contention is that the cultural power comes about because of the power of communication. Communication and information, both of which depend on digital technology. We know this. So let's just think about this for a minute. These are the people with the power in the modern age. And look at that logo in the middle, Nokia. Connecting people. That's their slogan. The power today comes from, the cultural power that was referred to, comes from being able to connect people. The biggest, most successful corporations, oil companies aside, are to do with communication, information based on technology. If we look at the growth of globalization, we can see that the growth of English goes hand in hand. So first of all, on this timeline, we see that in the 1950s and 60s, the businesses in different parts of the world still relied on the local language. English might have been used a bit for discussing things with suppliers, etc. But then as we move forward to the 1980s and 90s, we start this process of integrating the business globally. And then the demand for English becomes more. It's highly desirable. It's not yet quite necessary, but it's desirable. But as we move forward in time to the present, in the mid-90s, early 2000s, the world becomes digitally connected. At this point, proficiency in English is considered imperative, absolutely necessary. Now, as the growth in demand for English has taken place, so there has been a correlating growth in the demand for competence, by which I mean English that is used well. So if we look at this graph, as it goes up from the 1950s towards 2000, we see the growth in the requirement for English skills, as we've just outlined. But we look at the tolerance of poor English. Now, tolerance, will they put up with English that is not very good? And you see the tolerance is coming down. It needs to be good. After the point at which we start to become digitally connected, look what happens to the demand for English. Through the roof. And look what happens to the tolerance of poor English. It comes down. So not only do we need English, but more and more we need good English, proficient English. There we are again. And I just wonder what would happen if we project this line forward, because by 2020, there could be zero tolerance of poor English. Now, if we look at the people who work in global companies, and I say this is your students, and it's my students, and it's our students in perhaps 10 or 15 years' time, many of them will be in some way linked and possibly even employed by companies that are operating globally. And you look at the percentages of non-native English speakers that have been employed in global corporations. 1996, it was around 30%. 10 years later, it had risen to 50%. Last year, it was 70%. So what about 2015? Just 3 years from now. Let's add a trend line and see what happens. There we have it. If the trend continues, in 3 years' time, 90% of these global corporations would be non-native English speakers. I think that gives you an idea of the scale of the situation. Now returning to the second idea that I mentioned to you at the beginning, which is that of academic inflation. And I think it'll become clear what this means. Let's look at the traditional path in education. You work hard at school and you pass your exams. You get good grades, then you go to a university. You get a degree, and you get a good job, and live happily ever after. Well, I've got bad news for you. It's not that simple anymore. It is not that simple anymore. More and more people are getting degrees. So what does this mean? All the candidates for the same job, of course, need the same qualifications. And if there is a whole horde of people with the BA or the MA to qualify them for the job, how do the employers choose? Well, they need more than just academic qualifications. I think there are a number of things. Obviously, they want competence. Hopefully, the qualifications say something about whether you can do the job or not. Are you qualified? Teamwork, we have that. Leadership capability. Attitude. Motivation. Ability to learn. Increasingly, the ability to take responsibility and update your own skills will be something that employers look for. Problem-solving skills and effective communication. So now to the third and final part of my thesis, as it were, which is the knowledge-based economy. All of our students will work in one way or another in the knowledge-based economy. We are working in it now. We are living in it now. We've seen that the most powerful corporations on the planet are those to do with information and communication brought about by developments in technology. UNESCO World Education Report is something I've drawn on quite a lot. This is 4 years old now. But it tells us this: the knowledge available to us doubles every 2 to 3 years. Now think about what that means. If you type something into Google, what happens? Some links come up, and then at the top it says something like, showing 25 of 24 million. That's just one search term. Multiply that by the number of different things you can search for on Google. And then double it. Because that's what it will be like in 3 years' time, according to UNESCO. On average, 7,000 scientific, technical articles and papers are published every single day. But you know what? Most of them are in English. Data from satellites orbiting the Earth will fill 19 million volumes every 2 weeks. Graduates of high schools today will have been exposed to more information than their grandparents were in their entire lives. This is what UNESCO tell us. And that there will be as much change in the next 30 years as there was in the last 300 years. Now this is one of the consequences of the change. Because of technology, jobs become obsolete. Technology replaces people. The ATM. What can we do with an ATM? Well, obviously we can draw cash, we can pay our bills, we can top up our mobile, we can transfer money between our accounts, etc., etc. 20 years ago, people had to do all those things. And you think of the number of ATM machines there are in the world, you'll get an idea of the number of people whose jobs have disappeared. These are instruments that you see in the cockpit of a modern aircraft. This one on the left will tell the pilot how high the altitude of the aircraft, the speed, whether it's going up or down, whether it's tilting from side to side, and its course. All this information on a single computerized screen. The middle one will tell him his navigation situation, and even the weather coming up ahead. And the one on the right, on your right, tells you the status of the engines, the control surfaces, and all the rest of it. Now that's all very interesting, isn't it? What's it got to do with English? Well, you'll see. But what it has to do with what I'm talking about now is that two people will study those instruments in a typical flight. In the past, 4 people had to do those jobs. So 2 of the people, their jobs had disappeared. So that's the way technology replaces people. And finally, I'm sure you're all familiar with this one. How do we buy our music? They go to their iTunes store, they put their credit card details and then they download it to their iPod or their iPhone or whatever the latest cool technology happens to be. Jobs have disappeared because of those. But of course, new jobs, like the people who create the websites and maintain them, have been created. The point here is change. And because of technology, change is happening very quickly. So what it means is that if we train our students for a particular occupation or profession, we're not helping them at all if we let them think they will have that occupation for life. We must prepare them for the fact that because of communication, because of technology, their job is likely to change or disappear, and they may have to change their occupation or the emphasis of their occupation more than once, several times during their working lives. People starting school now will graduate, will sort of retire, sorry, not graduate, they'll retire in around 2070. Does anybody here have an idea, the remotest idea, of of what the world will be like then? Do we have a remote idea of what it will be like in 10 years from now? They will have to learn how to learn. They will have to be able to find information themselves, and English will be the medium. So this is the point. We're talking about iTunes, we're talking about aircraft dials, we're talking about ATM machines. The point is that it illustrates how jobs change, how they will change even more in the future, and to be able to update skills and update knowledge, to be able to adapt to the change, they're going to need English. So ultimately, your students, our students, ultimately their success in life could depend upon their competence in the use of English. In the use of English. They may know what a present continuous tense is. They may know what a past participle is. If they can't use the language, they've had it. They need to develop the skills to communicate. Our students, as we've seen, will face competition for employment. Whatever degrees they have will not be enough. They will need to compete, and they will be competing with people in global situations from countries where there's a long-established tradition of speaking English. So, time is short, and I think that in this country in particular, any English teacher needs to have a sense of urgency. Needs to have a really sense of commitment and a sense of urgency, because we don't want our students to be left at the starting post. And let's be clear, that's where education gets us. It doesn't get us to the finishing line. It gets us to the starting